morning, dear colleagues, to everyone. We start our work in Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Today's topic is not easy. It is sexual violence as a weapon of war in Donbas. Today, the East-Ukrainian Center for Public Initiatives present the results of their research, and I am giving the floor to Olga Vesnyanska. Good afternoon, good morning, dear audience, which gather here in UCMC. Unfortunately, we start this day with a very hard topic, but it is very important and needed in Ukraine. Today we report the findings of the analytical report. It is titled "The War Without Rules, Gender-Based Violence." This report is interested with the coverage of facts which happen in the illegal centers of captivity. This report is prepared by the Eastern Center of Public Initiatives. Today, our speakers are Volodymyr Shcherbachenko, chairman of the East-Ukrainian Center for Public Initiatives, Anna Yanova, researcher of the center, and international law, Anton Korynevych, specialist in international law and a well-known volunteer who was the witness in Donbas battalion in Donetsk. She was a witness of the violence. This information is related to many people who care about civil rights and human rights protection. This event is in the framework of the campaign against gender-based violence. This campaign is 16 days long, and it is good that we are doing this in this event today. The topic of sexual violence is not much talked about according to different data. In peaceful times, about 90% of victims address law enforcement bodies. Even in the time of peace, it is hard for us journalists to find any information from primary sources which is verified, which we can trust. That is why it is interesting for us. Tell us about your report, Volodymyr. How did you compile this report? What sources you use? Thank you. This topic is one of the most non-transparent. The victims do not like to speak about this, and there is a taboo in the society on this topic. The topic is not talked about much. So we took this difficult topic because this topic, although it is a hidden topic, but the society understands its importance, and the international community understands its importance of researching and detecting the crimes like this, and prosecution and punishment of the guilty persons. So our goal of the research is review of the situation with gender-based violence on both sides of the conflict line in Donetsk and Lugansk regions, to focus, to draw attention to this topic. We decided to research this topic. Our final goal of this research is to prosecute the perpetrators finally, because no punishment would not allow us to achieve peace. What are the sources of information? Sources of information are interviews with the persons who were subjected to violence or who witnessed violence. This is also a large amount of information from publications in printed press, and also court resolutions and research articles, the whole range of sources which were accessible. Here you see statistical data talking about the interviews. As of today, we have interviewed almost 300 persons, including 205 civilians, 49 women, 156 men, 94 servicemen, 6 women, and 88 men. Of their series, we selected 76 interviews about facts of gender-based violence, and 61 persons were direct victims. They were talking about themselves in the interviews. Most of data were about facts of violence in the places of involuntary detention. We are talking about 61 persons who were captured by militants, and 15 persons were subjected to violence, gender-based violence, in the other places, not in the detention centers of militants. What we mean under the gender-based violence, we mean sexual violence, physical violence, psychological violence against women, girls, men, and boys based on social gender role, which are linked to time, geography, and or cause and effect relationship with the conflict in Donbas. So these persons were either captured or detained by the militants, or they were servicemen or military men of the militants or Ukrainian armed forces. In the 70 interviews which I mentioned, often people talked about themselves and about the facts which they witnessed. A total of 175 cases were identified and documented. They are not from the articles in mass media. They are facts which were witnessed, or a person saw some attributes of sexual violence, such as torn out clothes or genital mutilations, which people were eyewitnesses of. Now we see Miss Iryna Dovhan. She is a witness, Iryna Dovhan. She is a volunteer who witnessed a gender-based violence in the military base of Vostok battalion in Donetsk. So if you have questions, you can ask questions after the presentation is over. This is very important when you talk with victims and witnesses. This report is unique due to this fact. When the conflict started, it was more focused on the articles in mass media, and these figures, they document the facts. When we analyze the report, in the first years, of the conflict. There were 30 cases which we detected now. You are talking about 175 cases. This is impressive figure. I would like to ask Mr. Anton Korynevych, this specialist in international law, where armed conflict is ongoing, where hostilities are ongoing, international law is not working, how people are protected from this type of violence. Good afternoon. We hope that where the hostilities are ongoing, national justice system is in operation. There are some facts of prosecutions, but they are not abundant. Of course, when we are talking about the armed conflict, we are talking about the international law, which has a section which has many norms protecting victims of the armed conflict and which prevent gender-based violence, talking about physical or psychological tortures or sexual violence. Of course, here we are talking about Geneva Conventions, which are international treaties signed by all countries of the world, and the articles of Geneva Conventions are saying that sexual violence is a violation, a grave violation of the international law. Sexual violence is also criminalized in the Roman Statute in Article 7 as a crime against humanity, and in Article 8 the war crimes. These crimes they match all criteria of the crimes of war and the crimes against humanity. It is important for Ukraine, although Ukraine has not ratified the Roman Statute, and you know the debates are ongoing, but anyway Ukraine has recognized the jurisdiction of the ICC. So Ukraine is now bound with all the articles of the Roman Statute, just like all other states which ratified the Roman Statute. So if we look at how ICC is addressing the situation in Ukraine, its working document, the report on preliminary examination of the situation in item 183, the Office of Criminal Prosecutor is saying that there are sexual violation facts in the east of Ukraine. It the office asks Ukraine to provide more information so that they understand what to do then, what next steps should be, whether they should initiate proceedings. So this report is valuable because the statistical data could be submitted to the prosecutor of ICC. It should be translated into English and submitted there. So preliminary examination was the assessment of information from different sources. So this source could be of positive income on initiating a full-fledged proceedings about sexual violence in Donbas. The situation is interesting because in the Roman Statute of ICC, sexual crimes are defined, and the list is not exhaustive. This is not characteristic for the international law. So the fantasy of people could develop in negative ways. So international law is saying that this list is not exhaustive, and in any country of the world something could happen which could be recognized as an additional sexual crime. So this practical component is important, and this information is important and to be submitted to ICC.
Thank you very much, Anton. for this opinion. This is the light in the end of the tunnel, and this information can be brought to International Criminal Court, and this is really what inspires in the restoration of justice. And we had an event with the Red Cross in Ukraine, a seminar for the media, and they spoke about the work in the conflict zone, humanitarian work, and I asked whether they work with the topic of helping those who suffered from sexual violence, and a representative of the Red Cross from other country, from central offices. She said that there is no proper data about this problem in Ukraine. They lack this data, so there are separate pieces of information. So there should be proper data in order to refer to this data. And among us there is representative of La Strada Center, and I hope that later on, when we have discussion, you will be able to contribute to the discussion, and this is joint effort in order to bring this information to light. And we want, when we speak about gender-based violence, we should name these things by their own names, and we see that you surveyed men and women, and it is about violence against men and women, and we should dismantle those myths that exist in the media in Ukraine concerning sexual violence, and we all know about them, and we would like to know about individual cases, and this is the hardest part. Those who watch us on YouTube, I want to warn that it can be difficult to watch this. So what types of sexual violence were recorded? And I give the floor to Yanova. She is the representative of East-Ukrainian Center for Public Initiatives. We wanted to show the influence of the conflict on gender-based violence, and we analyzed gender-based violence in the legal detention facilities while crossing the contact line, and also in the territorial communities of the zone of the conflict and territorial communities that are far away from the zone. And in several minutes, I'm going to tell you about gender-based violence, sexual violence in the legal detention facilities. And it is worth noting that sexual violence is a part of gender-based violence, and the forms that were revealed in the places of illegal detention. First, that men and women were in the same premises, and they were the representatives of different sides of the conflict. Also, they didn't provide access to children, and also there were some they didn't take into account the hygiene for men and women. They were all in bad sanitary conditions. Also, some people were, some men were dressed as women, and they were forced to dance or provide some services. And on the scheme, we see the places identified where men and women were held together, and we found 22 places like this, and we have more than 40 instances on the whole. So they hold men and women together in the places of illegal detention. And one of former military men said, a woman slept on the same pallets and we did, and she ate the same food, and she used a bin as a toilet, and we stooped our heads in order not to see it. So in these conditions, people spent weeks and even months. And one of the worst forms of the gender-based violence and sexual violence, and the victims were both men and women, girls and boys. And among the forms of sexual violence in the illegal places of detention that we were able to identify, I would like to mention several of them. This is rape and threats to rape, forced prostitution, torture with the use of sexual violence, also the attempted castration, threat of castration, and threat of sexual violence to the members of the family, and also people who stayed in these legal detention facilities were forced sometimes to observe the acts of sexual violence concerning other people, and torture with elements of sexual violence concerning other people, and also sexual harassment, sexual humiliation, and sometimes women observed naked men. It was forced action, and also there was ill treatment of pregnant women. Among those detained, there were the representatives of LGBT, so the citation from one of those who were freed from illegal detention facilities. So there was a homosexualist, he was captured as a spotter, and this man suffered a lot. They didn't allow him to sleep, eat, drink, and they were beating him, and one man came and put a broom in his anus, and then this man was bleeding, and he was squatted all the time, and it happened to him because he was a homosexualist. So these people really suffered in these facilities, and if we are speaking about different types of violence concerning men and women, women more often were raped and were threatened to be raped, and men were forced to undress, and they became victims of torture with elements of sexual violence. In the framework of this research, each third woman became a victim or a witness of sexual violence, and each fourth man became a victim or a witness of sexual violence. One of men said that he was threatened that he will be castrated. So in the course of torture, one tall man tried to cut my genitalia with the saw, but he only wounded my leg. So unfortunately, such cases are not unique. It happened both to men and women, I mean sexual violence. And now I give the floor to our moderator. Thank you, Ganna. Really, it is difficult to hear about these events, and in Gramatsky radio there was Alexander Pavlichenko, a lawyer, and he presented a report about those who went through hell, about illegal detention facilities and what we call captivity. And outside the broadcasting, I asked, did this topic, was this topic discussed? I mean, gender-based violence. He said that there were no such questions, but one man said about this case, and he said that this information should not be included in the report. So some time passed before this report, and we see after this report, and we see that there is data about numerous cases of gender-based sexual violence. So here in the announcement, it was said that you will mention who and where committed these crimes. And we ask Volodymyr Shcherbachenko to tell us about where these crimes were committed. We started this work from the report, those who survived the hell, and I participated and had the preparation of this report. So this is the continuation of our work, and now we established that there are more than 70 such places, and in the book, in the report, you may see identified places of illegal detention, and on the scheme it is identified where this was done. So occupied areas of Donetsk, Lugansk, Kyiv in Donetsk Oblast, Makivka in Lugansk, Alchesk, Antracit. All those places are identified. They have physical addresses, and in the majority of cases, we know what militant formations control these places. And these detention facilities, these are the premises, such as cells of administrative buildings. Sometimes this is a garage, or people were staying in cages for animals, or in the rooms of administrative buildings in the best case. And in separate instances, these are detention facilities, but in the majority of cases, these are the places that are not suited for people, and these are the places where people were deprived of any protection, legal or physical protection, and these were the places where sexual violence was often used. And this is a citation. At night, militia came, about 3 people. One hit me in my stomach, second helped him, and the third tried to take off my trousers. They didn't succeed, but because I didn't have a button, I put the Y instead of the button, and they said that they have ceiling foam, and they said that they put it in the anus of women, and they will do the same to me. But in the last moment, they got scared, and they hit me several times more, and then they left. So sexual violence, those cases we identified, people were just helpless, and so the citation you've mentioned, this shows that this type of violence, this is humiliation, psychological violence, so everything was a mix. And today we have one more participant. This is a volunteer, Iryna Dovhan. She is the resident of Yanova, Donetsk Oblast, and she became a witness of this type of violence. And you were also detained and held in the illegal detention facility. Tell us, please, what you want to tell us today. And we know that a criminal case about your detention was opened 3 years ago. So what is the stage of this investigation? So what is the attitude towards you from the side of the SBU?
Good morning. First of all, I would like to say that I am here telling what happened with me, first of all, because I am a happy survivor, a person who was not sexually violated as a result, not raped. I would like to extend this for the audience who are professionals, who understand very much that to tell about the facts you were exposed to. It is not possible without emotions. I was not sexually violated. That's why I can speak about that. If I experience sexual violence, then I think any woman would not be able to talk about the facts that happened to her if such facts had happened. I was captured for 5 days, only 5 mere days. It was a fantastic miracle, and a photographer, international freelancer, made my picture. In half an hour he sold his picture to New York Times, and in the morning next morning, New York Times was this photo was published. So the battalion Vostok, they fast got to know about this photograph, and the rest 5 days of captivity, I was not subject to violence. I was just observed, and I can't imagine what other people experience. On the third day of my captivity, it was the most difficult day of tortures. More than 10 persons of Ossetina region in camouflage uniforms. They did not see in me a human being. They did not rape me there. Maybe this is because I was very dirty and I am not young. To my I was not of interest for them. The same people, they brought me to the square. They put a banner on me, and they were saying to people that she is a sporter and she gets money for sporting, and people started beating me. This is not a surprise. It was a provocation on the side of this armed persons. Only one of them is on the picture. They were experienced people. That is why they are not on the photo, because after 5 hours near this, I was brought to a cell in some premises. For some time I was beaten several times. In a sequence, they also used gas from balloon against me, and I also witnessed some facts. I heard a phone call to the hotline of Vostok battalion. I heard that one person who was talking on the phone, a homosexualist should be captured. Some people from this Vostok battalion took arms and went to take this homosexualist. After some time, I heard from my cell, I saw a man with his pants removed. He was rather fat man in his middle age. It was an awful scene, I would like to say. it is very difficult to experience beatings, but when you see tortures and beatings of the other person, it is even more awful. I heard him beaten. I heard how he was saying, "I did nothing to that girl. I was living with a woman, a neighboring woman, and I quitted her. I just didn't want to live with her." He tried to tell the truth, that he is innocent, that the woman was just wanting revenge against him for leaving her. So those people raped him. Someone told not to rape him here. All those people took the man and brought him somewhere, and it was very difficult for me. I was crying. It is difficult to bear such experience and to experience such scenes. Yes, we will talk about this. I'd like to tell here that this topic is vulnerable for mass media sources. In analytical report, the victim term is used, but it is better to use the word, the term just person who suffered violence. Let's be careful with the terms. You are talking about this 175 cases. Your case is one out of this 175, as far as I understand. And can you tell us about your criminal case? What is the status of criminal proceedings about your captivity? Do you feel respect from the security service of Ukraine, from law enforcement bodies? After I was liberated, the only person who expressed interest to me, she is my lawyer, Evgenia Zakrevskaya, in September, when she questioned me. And after 3 weeks after my liberation, there were the rest of signs of beatings on my body. It was documented thanks to my lawyer's efforts, but only after 1 year I was invited to law enforcement bodies, and by initiative of Alexander Pavlichenko, a volunteer NGO, called on me 1 year ago. I was called to the military prosecutor's office. A military prosecutor knew nothing about my experience. He called on me just as an ADP. For 2 hours we were talking. He let me go, and for 1 year nobody called on me. Several days ago I was called to the military prosecutor's office, and finally I was interrogated by the military prosecutor. I don't remember his surname. He knew what happened, so he connected my testimonies with other cases. I see it here. You can witness. I have an open proceedings. For 5 days I saw many facts and I told him about them. So 1 month ago the military prosecutor's office in fact initiated the criminal case and they took my testimonies, and now I am in the focus of their interest. There were also some Polish people who came 1.5 years ago, 2 professionals, not young men, who documented everything what I experienced in Vostok battalion. It was by initiative of Malgorzata Yosevska, a parliamentarian from Poland. So Poland was interested in my testimonies. They took me to Brussels, where I gave testimonies along with Alexander Homchenko, pastor from Donetsk. We witnessed before the European Parliament. We hope that Ukrainian law enforcement borders also will manage to bring these proceedings to the end and also submit it to ICC. What was important for journalists, it was said that specific suspects would be named, who are named by in this report, who are most likely are perpetrators.
We identified several dozens of people, and part of them can be found in our report. And witnesses, they helped us to identify and find these people on video and photos. And part of these people, they are on a wanted list. You can find them on the site of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And some of these people, we didn't find them on the site. Some of them are mentioned on the Mirotvorit site, and others are absent. And I won't tell you about every one of them because we are limited in time. And here are both citizens of Ukraine and citizens of Russian Federation. Some of these people, they hold rather high positions in the hierarchy of these pseudo-republics, Plotnitsky, Zakharchenko, Khodakovsky. So these 3 that I've mentioned, they are all on a wanted list. And also those who suffered, they said about that these people knew about the illegal detention places. They knew about conditions there, and they knew about people who were there and that they are tortured, and they had authority to stop this violence and to help investigate it. So practically they had authority to prevent those actions. So among those whom we have, so I would like to speak about citizens of Russian Federation. This is Sokolov Igor Volodymyrovich. He wrote his so he was a commander in one of such detention facilities in Eastern Ukrainian University, and he is not on a wanted list, and he writes on his site about his own violations and detention of Ukrainian citizens. Also, these are people who are made sadistic actions, and Monyak and one more. What is his name? Phobos. And they provided influence on the internet, on YouTube, but they are not on a wanted list of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The situation is not so we also identified the facts of gender-based violence committed by Ukrainian forces, volunteer battalions, and you know that the biggest case was Tornado battalion. 3 people were convicted according to this articles, and there are other instances, and there are video on the internet how Ukrainian forces detain separatists and put off their trousers, and this is not a visit to proctologists. They shouldn't have done this, but we have fewer facts like this in this side because the system differs here and there in uncontrolled territories. There is absence of law, and this is done. These violations are committed in both sides of the contact line. Now I give the floor to Ms. Yanova to speak about conclusions of this work and what is planned to be done with this information. According to results of our research, unfortunately, we are limited in time, and we were able to discuss only a small part of what we analyzed in our report, because except of gender-based violence in illegal detention facilities, there are violations in the gray zone and domestic violence of demobilized soldiers, those who are released or those who return from ATO zone. They say that they create Debaltseva in their own home. Also, there are no proper rehabilitation corrective programs for these individuals, and also absence of access to decisions concerning Tornado, and in this unified single registry of cases, it should provide proper access, and only some information can be restricted. So also the cases, such as the case of Iryna, such cases, they are investigated only in some time, and not all aspects are included. And we would like to state once again that it is necessary to ratify the Istanbul Convention, because the facts of domestic violence from demobilized soldiers, they will happen, and we should address this problem, and we should document such issues in the conflict zone, and we should teach law enforcers and the military prosecutors office specialists how to document and how to investigate such cases. And also we should introduce special programs that take into account what trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder concerning those individuals who are who served in ATO, and I call on you to reread this report, and this will be maybe one of the platforms for further discussion. I would like to stress one more important conclusion we reached about the facts we recorded. Sexual violence in conflict was used as a weapon, and it was not discussed before, but this is the case. And in the majority of cases, we recorded sexual violence was used consciously, and it was used against ideological opponents or military adversaries, and the situation in which it was used shows that the aim of this violence was to threaten, to humiliate, to kill the spirit of those who were detained. And there are videos that show that illegal armed groups representatives say about their motives in these videos, in the videos that they held their hostages in sewage facility, and also they provide this video through the internet in order to break the spirit of people. And this sexual violence, it was recorded, and it was all over this network of detention facilities. So we may speak about this the systemic character. So the approach to people and this violence, it was not in the documents, but we may clearly say about systemic character and purposefulness of such type of violence. And in Bosnia, only 20 years after the conflict, they sentenced the leader, military criminal Ratko Mladic, and what time will it take for Ukraine to bring this to the level of international jurisdiction? And here we know that there are journalists who will comment and ask questions. Maybe you have questions, please ask. And then I will give the floor to Katerina Levchenko from the Strada Center to speak. So if there are questions, please ask.
Yes, we would like some interactive talking about international justice. We need time. Wheels of justice of international courts, they are not fast. You mentioned Ratko Mladic case and other cases of international tribunals. They prove that ICC and other international tribunals would be very much interested in the cases of people who are on top of the tree, who control and who allow all these crimes to happen. They are leaders of so-called republics and leaders of separate battalions, and Russian military men who control situation in those territories. They should be subjects number one, talking about the international justice and its attention to the armed conflict in Donbas. Thank you very much to Mr. Anton. And now I am giving the floor to Ms. Katerina. Thank you. Katerina Levchenko. I am head of La Strada Ukraine and national consultant on sexual violence related to the conflict, talking about the long-term perspective. This strategy has been developed by request of the government about gender-based violence. There is a wording of strategy, but the process of consultations with the government is ongoing, so for its approval, and we hope it would be in the reviewed plan 1325 of the UN Security Council. This report will be the document containing source facts. This not evidences, but and not lack of documents, but lack of responsibility, lack of liability for the crime. This is what were where the problem is. They should be included into disciplinary statutes, and administrative procedures and criminal law procedures should be applied. Very important is the crimes, sexual violence related to the conflict, they are not covered as those as it should be according to international law. The expert assessment should be conducted, and the report which is presented today, it could become a component. We got 55 calls from the non-occupied territories to the national hotlines related to the violation as not domestic violence, and also there were cases of domestic violence. This is also proving that the problem is serious. Thank you, Ms. Katerina. For many governmental institutions, these are recommendations for actions. As Ms. Iryna said, how the military prosecutor's office got to know their situation not from the very beginning, so special education is required for those staff of prosecutor's office and courts, even if a person is a witness of violence, because this is a traumatic experience. Are there questions among the audience now? Colleagues, you are welcome. Olga Korynevych, a volunteer. The topic is very important in the report. Do you have statistics where there are cases concerning documenting by NGOs, where any criminal cases were registered in the unified register by victims of gender-based violence, because this issue is very important for our statehood, because stereotypes of some collective liability which are inflicted, they are not true. Law enforcement bodies and courts, they do not understand the definition of gender-based violence. That is why these cases are tried in courts which concern sexual violence. As staff of governmental authorities do not understand what is gender-based violence. Let's not talk in general. There are different staff members. Our experience shows this, that the persons have never been asked questioned about gender-based violence. So our information proves that unfortunately there is much to do, there is much space to in this area. We should start, and we should ratify Istanbul Convention. Thank you very much to everyone for your participation, for your work, and to you, Miss Iryna, for the story you told us. Thank you.